If anything were to happen to you up there, you know, there is no one else. You are more alone than any other human being up there.
I gotta tip my hat to astronauts. Every time they launch themselves off into space, it is a risk. But not only that, situations can take a turn for the worst at any time while they're up working in the International Space Station. Astronauts have seen and experienced things you and I likely never will firsthand. So here are some of their stories. We're going to start off the list with a very spooky piece of audio picked up during the Apollo 10 mission in 1969. But before you hear it, just going to give you a little preamble. The team was orbiting the moon testing various equipment when Gene Cernan, piloting the lunar module, heard something strange. It was an eerie, whistling, whooshing kind of sound. He asked two of his fellow astronauts, John Young and Tom Stafford, if they heard it as well. They all agreed it was a strange noise, saying how it sounded spacey, like space music. So give it a listen.
You hear that whistling sound?
Definitely a creepy thing to hear while floating around in the vastness of space. As if floating around in the vastness of space isn't freaky enough as it is. What do you think of this though? Is it just some kind of technological feedback? Could aliens have been communicating with them? Share your thoughts down below. And don't forget, while you're sharing those thoughts, to like and subscribe as well. Got videos coming at you on the daily. Next up, we have the Cosmos 1408 accident. The Cosmos 1408 is a Russian satellite, or more accurately, it was a Soviet Union satellite launched in 1982 that operated for a couple years before becoming inactive. It was still floating around in orbit up until 2021, when it was destroyed by a Russian anti-satellite weapon test. But the thing is, the obliteration of this satellite caused this mass of space debris that posed a real threat to the International Space Station. At the time of this incident, there were 7 crew aboard the ISS, and this cloud of debris was flying through orbit above the ISS, intersecting with its orbit every 93 minutes. There was a real danger here, a bunch of space junk colliding with a space station, not terribly safe. So Mission Control contacted the crew, told them, you guys gotta put your spacesuits on and take shelter in the escape crew capsules just in case the debris smashes into the station. Now, everything turned out to be fine, and at this point there are only about 300 pieces of the initial 1,800 still in orbit, but still, this would have been quite a fright. Pieces of an exploded satellite might smash into the station, guys, so throw on your spacesuits, hop in the escape pods, and hope for the best. Next on the list, we have a series of strange lights spotted by astronaut Leroy Chiao. In 2005, Leroy Chiao, the commander of the International Space Station, saw something pretty incredible during a spacewalk. It was a pretty routine day. He was working outside the ISS doing whatever it is astronauts do up there when he noticed a formation of lights. He described the lights as being arranged in a line and compared the formation to like almost an upside down check mark. They seemed to be a structured and deliberate arrangement of lights rather than random or natural phenomena. So what were these lights? Was it reflections from debris, aliens? Well, there's no concrete evidence, but one thing is for sure, it wasn't just his mind playing tricks on him, because the rest of the crew saw the lights as well. Next up, we have the Alan Bean sighting. Alan Bean, a NASA astronaut, reported seeing something oddly shiny on the moon, something he described looking like shoe leather. What could this shiny thing have been? Bean suggested it might have been similar to glass, but really had no idea. Ever since he mentioned this, people have taken the shiny object idea and like really ran with it, talking about possible leftovers from alien technology on the moon or something like that. Really, there's no solid explanation for what he saw. The term shoe leather doesn't exactly clarify what this shiny object could have been. Was it a reflection of something, a natural element? Could have been human-made material left behind as well. Next, we have the UFO. During the Apollo 16 mission, astronauts John Young, Thomas Mattingly, and Charles Duke were heading back from the moon when they filmed about 4 seconds of footage. In the video, there's a saucer-like object floating above the lunar surface. It looks like your classic UFO, the type you'd see in a 50s B movie or something. Footage was taken from a 16mm motion picture camera shooting at 12 frames per second from the window of the command service module. Now, they didn't realize what they'd captured on camera until after the mission, otherwise they'd have probably lost control of the vessel. It's one thing to think you saw something weird in the sky when your feet are like firmly planted on the ground, on Earth, but seeing one while you're floating through space, that would be a whole other story. You're in their territory. Some of you may not know this, but it's not just human beings that have left Earth's atmosphere. There are tons of animals that have been launched into space, and many of them never made it back. So there are a number of US and Soviet ships still floating in orbit, with the remains of dogs and chimps still inside of them. And some of them are said to still be seen time to time. These animals being sent up into space was referred to by NASA as the Albert Project. Soviet and US governments were putting all they had into the space race. It was one of the most intense competitions in history, it has to be. And because there was so much on the line and sending human beings up into space without having worked out all the kinks was pretty dangerous, they decided to send up animals first instead. Albert was the name given to several chimps used in these experiments. These missions were to study the effects of space travel on living things, focusing on issues like weightlessness and the impact of high-speed launches and re-entries. Sucks that a bunch of animals had to die, but it really did help move the technology forward. Next up, we have the Soyuz MS-10 launch. This would have been a pretty scary incident. So on October 11th of 2018, a spacecraft launched carrying two crew members, Russian cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin and NASA astronaut Nick Hague, to the International Space Station. But just over 2 minutes into the flight, the crew reported feeling weightless. Turned out there was a booster separation issue. The rocket's first and second stages separated during the ascent to propel the spacecraft into orbit, but one of the 4 boosters failed to detach properly, so the spacecraft's launch escape system was activated. I never want to be in space and hear escape system activated. That is freaky. This system is designed to rapidly propel the crew capsule away from the rocket in the event of a launch malfunction. Fortunately, it worked, and the Soyuz MS-10 capsule was separated from the malfunctioning rocket. The capsule then made its descent, but at a much steeper trajectory than a normal landing. So the crew actually experienced about 7 times Earth's gravity on the way down. Imagine how insane that would feel, especially after having just felt weightless. Now you have 7 times Earth gravity pressing down on you. That's a pretty extreme contrast. But after the descent, the capsule touched down safely in a designated landing area in Kazakhstan, and both crew members emerged from the capsule unharmed. Up next, we have ammonia leaks. Ammonia is an important substance used in the International Space Station's cooling systems. These systems are responsible for maintaining the right temperature within the station to make sure equipment and systems operate properly. Ammonia is circulated through a series of pipes and radiators to help dissipate excess heat that gets generated by the components of the craft. But sometimes there can be issues with leakage. This is obviously a risk. The main concern with ammonia is that it can freeze into small ice particles in the vacuum of space, which could damage parts of the station. In 2013, there was an ammonia leak on the ISS. Astronauts detected small white flakes of ammonia outside the station during a routine spacewalk. There was a faulty pump module, so astronauts had to walk outside the station and remove and replace it. Pretty scary situation, but the repairs were successful. Next up, we have the discovery of a pretty volatile substance known as moondust. So moondust, or lunar regolith, is this fine, powdery stuff all over the moon's surface. It's made of tiny particles smashed together by meteoroids over tons and tons of years, but don't let the word dust fool you into thinking the worst thing it can do is make you sneeze. This is not a harmless substance. Moondust is sharp, rough, highly reactive because the moon doesn't have weathering like we do here. This dust sticks to gear, and that's bad news for spacesuits. spacecraft, and machinery. You know, it's rough and it gets everywhere. I hate moon dust. Breathing or eating this dust would be deadly. It messes with your breathing, can cause severe health problems. So this lunar dust can be a pain for equipment, causing potential breakdowns. And back in the Apollo missions, astronauts had problems with moon dust sticking to their spacesuits, and there were worries about potential health risks in the long term. If it wasn't already abundantly clear based on all the space docs and movies out there, space is a very volatile place. Finally, we have the challenges of lower gravity in space, more specifically the negative effects it has on astronauts' bodies. I always wanted to experience weightlessness, basically like flying, really floating, really, but it looks fun. I'd imagine though it'd be very nauseating after a while. Well, there are a number of negative side effects of weightlessness in space, aside from just an upset stomach. First, the lack of resistance that Earth's gravity puts on us on a constant basis can lead to muscle atrophy. The muscles that aren't actively used, especially the ones that support posture and body weight on Earth, can weaken and decrease in size. Then you have bone problems. On Earth, bones undergo constant stress, also because of gravity. This helps maintain bone density. And microgravity, the lack of stress on bones, can lead to a loss of bone density, making them more prone to fractures and weakening. Fluids in the body tend to shift towards the upper body and head in microgravity. This can actually affect the cardiovascular system in a negative way. Some astronauts have even reported changes in vision during and after extended stays in space. Weightlessness also seems to affect the immune system, making astronauts more susceptible to infections. Scientists still aren't 100% sure why that is, though. And then, of course, there's just the psychological effects for a prolonged time out in space. It doesn't just relate to the lack of gravity, but everything. Feelings of isolation, stress, working in a confined space, out in space, as far away from the rest of the world as you can get.
Astronauts on the ISS have to exercise for 2 hours a day to prevent muscle loss, but their bones still lose calcium over time, and they don't recover until they come back to Earth. Adding to this, we don't know how the human body will react on Mars, where gravity is only about 0.38 the strength of Earth. Many people have long assumed that humans can survive just fine in Martian gravity. It'll be just like Earth, only we can jump a little higher, but we don't actually know this for a fact. It might turn out that low Martian gravity is just as bad for human health as zero gravity. Mars's low gravity may also erode other capabilities that are crucial for everyday functioning. For instance, NASA has found that eyesight can mysteriously deteriorate in zero gravity. Astronaut John Phillips went from a perfect 20/20 to 2100 after just 6 months aboard the ISS. Astronauts also find it harder to sleep in zero gravity, and many passengers in space suffer from insomnia. Number 9. Space Shuttle Challenger astronauts died instantly. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into its flight and ended the lives of all 7 crew members instantly. The spacecraft disintegrated 46,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Cape Canaveral, Florida at 11:39 a.m. It was the first fatal accident involving an American spacecraft in flight. It was thought that all the astronauts passed away instantly, but it was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware as they plummeted towards the Atlantic Ocean, which is terrifying. Understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled this space program even more than it already was, so they kept this a secret. I'm gonna be honest, I do understand the reasoning for this, but it's just sad. Number 8. The sun is a big ball of fire. Okay, so this isn't all NASA's fault, but despite what you've been led to believe, the sun is not a ball of fire. There isn't any fire in the sun. Fire requires oxygen, and the sun is composed mostly of helium and hydrogen. In fact, the heat from the sun comes from something called nuclear fusion. The pressure and temperature in the sun's core causes the hydrogen atoms to fuse together into helium atoms. This process gives off the intense heat and light of the sun. People, including scientists, sometimes say that the sun burns hydrogen to make it glow, but that is just a figure of speech. Hydrogen really doesn't burn, it fuses into helium. Also, the sun itself is white, which means it contains all the colors in the visible spectrum. The sun appears orangish yellow because of the blue light it emits has a shorter wavelength and is scattered in the atmosphere, which is the same process that makes the sky appear blue. Number 7. Mars is the only other habitable planet. It's been said that Mars is the only other habitable planet, but that's not true. Kepler 186f is the first rocky exoplanet to be found within the habitable zone, as the region around the host star has the temperature that is right for liquid water. This planet is also very close in size to Earth. While planets have previously been found in the habitable zone, they are at least 40% larger in size than Earth, and understanding their makeup is challenging. Kepler 186f is more reminiscent of Earth. Although the size of Kepler 186f is known, its mass and composition are not. Previous research, however, suggests that a planet the size of Kepler 186f is likely to be rocky. Even though we may not find out about what's going on at the surface of this planet anytime soon, it's a strong reminder of why new technologies are being developed that will enable scientists to get a closer look at distant worlds, but we still have a lot to learn. So maybe one day the human race will be living on Kepler 186f. Number 6. Your rocket won't blow up before leaving Earth. Yeah, your rocket can actually explode before you even leave Earth. For example, Elon Musk's plan to go to Mars involves strapping a giant spaceship atop the biggest rocket that humanity has ever built. Because any rocket launch basically involves a long, controlled explosion, no matter how many safety tests are done beforehand, there is always a risk. If anything goes wrong, if the explosion gets out of control, the people strapped in that big container of fuel don't stand a chance. For context, NASA's Space Shuttle program carried 833 passengers between 1981 and 2011. Of those, 14 people died in explosions in 2 high-profile accidents, a fatality rate of 1.6%. That's more dangerous than driving, and it's even a bit riskier than climbing Mount Everest. Some of SpaceX's smaller Falcon 9 rockets have either exploded on the launch pad or blown up mid-flight as well, so safe to say getting to space is just as dangerous as being there. Number 5. Extended space travel doesn't affect DNA. It's not true. Astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year at the International Space Station in 2016, returned to find out that he was 2 inches taller than his departing height. The new physical differences between Scott and his identical twin brother, Mike, also an astronaut, were startling. Scientists compared the DNA of the two and found that besides growing 2 inches, Scott's gut bacteria were completely different and his gene expression had changed. Scientists concluded that the changes were caused by the stresses of space travel, which can cause changes in a cell's biological pathways. Although Scott eventually returned to his original height, his other genetic changes are seemingly irreversible, meaning Scott and his brother are no longer identical twins, which is insane. Number 4. You can only see the Great Wall of China from space. It's been said that the only man-made structure you can see from space is the Great Wall of China, but the visible wall theory was shaken after China's own astronaut, Yang Lui, said he couldn't see the historic structure. There was even talk about rewriting textbooks that supported the theory, a formidable task in Earth's most populous nation. The issue surfaced again after photos taken by Leroy Chiao from the International Space Station were determined to show small sections of the wall in Inner Mongolia, about 200 miles north of Beijing. A photo was taken of it, but it wasn't the only thing seen. For years, it's been said that the Great Wall of China is the only structure to be seen from space, but that isn't true. From the ISS about 250 miles up, you can see the Great Wall along with numerous other man-made structures, but it's definitely not the most visible imprint of man on our planet.
In space, no one can hear you scream. Even though that's the tagline to one of the greatest science fiction movies ever made, there is some truth to it. Astronauts are isolated from the rest of the world while they're up there, far from the safety of home, out in the cold, vast black void that is space. So here are some of their stories. We're going to start out the list with an incredibly alarming situation. Really, this is the last thing you'd want to find in space, aside from an alien face hugger on board. A freaking air leak. On the 6th of June of 2018, the Soyuz MS-09 mission launched. 3 astronauts, including a Russian commander and 2 flight engineers, 1 American and 1 German, were transported to the International Space Station. For a couple of months, their time on the ISS was pretty routine as being in the middle of space can be, anyway. That was until the 29th of August. It was in the middle of the night, and the crew received a message from Mission Control. They detected a slight change in air pressure and found that there was a small air leak. There was a 2mm hole in the orbital module. So 2 millimeters, tiny, but in space, this would be incredibly alarming. Fortunately, they managed to seal up the hole and there were no more changes in air pressure, but they had some questions as to how this hole got there in the first place, and it turns out something shady could have gone on. Apparently this hole had been hidden with a, quote, low-quality patch job, and had apparently been created with a drill. Russian officials became suspicious of NASA, accusing them of intentionally sabotaging the mission. There were even theories that one of the crew members themselves drilled the hole, as it was found to have been drilled from the inside. A Russian tabloid accused the American astronaut on board of creating the hole after she apparently had a failed romantic relationship with another member of the crew. Just really outlandish stuff. The whole thing was a complete mess, and we still don't know exactly what went on here. Next on the list we have the space snake. Story Musgrave is a retired NASA astronaut who's had more experience in space than most in the field. He also has 6 degrees, he's a physician, a mathematician. The man is incredibly experienced and intelligent. He also firmly believes that there is life out in space, and he may have had a first-hand experience. He claimed to have seen an 8-foot-long snake-like creature on 2 separate space missions. He was featured on an episode of the TV series Sightings, speaking about his odd experiences with the creature, and was quoted saying, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and just some single-cell organisms, and other civilizations that have been around for a million years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things." The SpaceX CRS-7 incident. The SpaceX-7 was a mission to send an uncrewed spacecraft, the Dragon, to resupply the International Space Station. It was the Dragon's 9th flight. It launched from the Falcon 9 launch vehicle, and at first, everything seemed fine, but 139 seconds into the launch, a cloud of white vapor appeared, and there was a sudden loss of pressure in the liquid oxygen tank of the Falcon 9's rocket's 2nd stage. The rocket continued for a few seconds before breaking apart. The Dragon CRS-7 capsule was thrown clear of the explosion and hit the ocean. SpaceX said the capsule could have been saved if the parachutes had deployed, but the software didn't have the right instructions for that situation. It was found that a metal piece called a strut had failed. This particular strut held a high-pressure helium bottle in place within the rocket's liquid oxygen tank. Because the strut failed, helium rushed into the tank, causing too much pressure, and it eventually burst. Now, luckily, there was nobody on board. Again, this was an unmanned mission, but it just goes to show how much of a risk spaceflight is. Every time astronauts launch into space, they're risking their lives. Things can just go wrong at the drop of a hat. The same goes for this next failed mission, the Cygnus Orb 3. Again, nobody aboard, but it would have been disastrous if there was. So this was an attempted flight of an automated cargo spacecraft. Again, it would have brought food and supplies to the crew of the International Space Station. This would have been Cygnus's 4th flight to the ISS. The Antares rocket carrying the Cygnus spacecraft launched on October 28th, 2014. Just 15 seconds after liftoff, though, there was a failure in the first stage's propulsion system. The rocket started falling back to the launch pad. This could have been quite a disaster. A rocket plummeting into the Earth, might cause some bodily harm to workers down there. So in order to prevent that from happening, the range safety officer activated the flight termination system. Basically, the thing self-destructed just before hitting the ground. How awesome would it be to press a button that makes a rocket explode in midair? I imagine it being a big like red button with like explode written on it, but it's probably a bit more sophisticated than that. This explosion was so intense though that it could be felt 20 miles away. Thankfully, no one was injured. Toilet trouble, issues with plumbing, it just completely upends your life. You feel lost and confused. As bad as a broken toilet is here on Earth though, imagine being stuck up in space and realizing you have a busted crapper. That is a truly horrifying thing to discover. In 2021, astronauts departing from the ISS realized they were gonna have to head back to Earth without a toilet. The 4 astronauts had a 20-hour journey back to Earth in their SpaceX capsule, and they'd have to do their business in diapers the entire time. Oh, and this is the same crew that had to endure the whole thruster malfunction that had the entire space station rotating, by the way. Not the luckiest bunch here. By Earth standards, anyway. By astronaut standards, I guess they kind of are pretty lucky, because they made it to space and back without, dying. Next up, we have even more toilet trouble. Turns out there's been issues on the International Space Station as well. This incident happened back in 2019. The crew of the ISS was attempting to upgrade their toilet and ended up causing a water leak. The toilet they currently had on board had been installed in 2008 and was a bit outdated. This new universal waste management system would be less clunky, it was cleaner, and just overall more efficient. But one of the water pipes leaked and 2.5 gallons of water started floating about the station, which the astronauts then had to collect. Luckily, the pipe leaked before the toilet was officially christened, because that would have been truly nightmarish. Floating around, collecting water, fine. Actually might have been kind of fun. Floating around in space having to gather up yellow or brown water, not quite as enjoyable. I also don't know why they didn't install that toilet when the capsule was still on the ground, but oh no, it's on the space station. It's up in space. Never mind. In June of 1965, astronauts Ed White and James McDivitt spotted something strange while passing over Hawaii. They were in a Gemini spacecraft when they spotted something that looked like a UFO. It was metallic, and they also described it having long arms sticking out of it. McDivitt spotted the object while White was asleep. He grabbed a 16mm film camera to try and take footage of the object. White then woke up saying he spotted the thing as well. McDivitt contacted the capsule coordinator attempting to describe what they were seeing. In part of the transcript, McDivitt is quoted saying, "I just saw something else up here with me, but just as I was getting close enough to take a good picture, the sun got in the way and I lost it." He went on to say, "It had big arms sticking out of it, it looked like. I only had it for just a minute. I got a couple of pictures with a movie camera and one with the Hasselblad, but I was in free drift. Before I could get the control back, I drifted and lost it." Now this one needs to be taken with a grain of salt, or a lot of grains. It's a Reddit post made by a now deleted user attempting to stay anonymous. They claim to be an ex-astronaut who experienced something strange while on a mission, and I just think this is a spooky story, real or not. They write, "I can't disclose my identity, but let's just say I've been around the celestial block a few times. It was a routine spacewalk checking the exterior of the ISS. Everything was humming along when I noticed this faint glow just beyond the Earth's horizon. At first I thought it was the sun playing tricks, but this was different. It was a subtle shimmer, almost mirage-like. I radioed Houston to check if there were any anomalies, but they said all systems were normal. It was just strange, a gentle, pulsating light, and not blinding, but kind of hypnotic. As I reached out to grab a handrail, I felt a strange, static charge. That's when things got downright eerie. I saw these tiny, luminous particles dancing around me, forming intricate patterns. Suddenly, the particles converged into this figure, humanoid in shape, but made of pure light. It just hovered there, staring at me. No facial features, just a luminous silhouette. The next thing I knew, the figure disappeared into those shimmering particles and floated away. I radioed Houston, but they couldn't pick up anything unusual on their end. I finished the spacewalk, returned to the station, and went about my duties like nothing happened. But every time I look down at Earth, I can't shake the feeling that there's something out there, something beyond our understanding. Call it space-induced hallucination or whatever, but I swear, that encounter was unlike anything I've ever experienced. And finally, we have the tale of the knocking. So in 2003, Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei was launched on his first mission up to the vast darkness of space. He was China's first man in space. He was sent up in a small craft all alone. Again, first time. Brave dude right here. Going up to space would be scary enough as it is, but things got creepy when Liwei started hearing something. He was in space all alone when he began hearing what sounded like a knock on the spacecraft. He described it as, quote, someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer, and went on to say it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. He took a look outside the porthole and nothing, which was actually probably a relief. Here on Earth, if we heard a knocking sound on our door and opened it only to find there was nothing there, we'd be totally freaked out, right? But in space, probably for the best, we don't see anyone or anything.